Once upon a time, there lived a very beautiful woman who lived in the quiet city of Enugu. Her name was Onyi, and she was a busy caterer who catered for numerous events in the city. Despite being a big caterer, Onyi had no car of her own. She would struggle daily with public transportation, carrying food trays and supplies in her hands, whilst navigating through the bustling city of Enugu. It was so exhausting, but Onyi never let her struggles affect her passion for cooking. One day, she was hired to cater for the exclusive dinner at the residence of Chief Emeka Okafor, one of the wealthiest men in the city. His mansion sat on the outskirts of town, making it difficult for Onyi to easily transport the food that she had prepared. She hired a taxi to the event, and even then, the driver had to stop multiple times to refuel his car and navigate his way through police checkpoints. By the time she arrived Chief's residence, she was breathless and drenched in sweat. Despite the struggle, Onyi put on a bright smile as she served the guests with grace. The aroma of her dishes filled the air, and soon every guest was singing praises about her cooking. Chief Emeka was so impressed by her dedication. However, he could not help but notice her obvious struggles. At the end of the event, as Onyi was waiting for her taxi to arrive, Chief Emeka called her aside and commended her for the job well done. "You did an amazing job tonight, Onyi," he said with a warm smile on his face. "However, I noticed how difficult it was for you to get here," he said to Onyi, revealing that a caterer like her should have a reliable means of transportation. Onyi nodded, knowing that Chief had a point. She revealed to him that she was currently saving up money to get a car, and Chief smiled and gestured towards his garage, where several luxury cars were parked. He pointed to a black SUV, one of the many vehicles that he hardly ever used. "Take it," he simply said to Onyi, whose eyes widened in disbelief. "Chief, this is too much, oh," Onyi said, as Chief assured her that it was nothing. His garage was already filled with exotic cars, and Chief, being an extremely wealthy man, barely used them all. "You can have it, Onyi, or leave it here and let it keep gathering dust," he said to Onyi, who dropped to her knees in gratitude. "Thank you, sir. May God bless you abundantly," she said as she rushed into the car in excitement. Onyi drove the car home that night, reeling in shock. When she arrived home, her friends gathered around the car, with their eyes wide in disbelief. "Onyi, is this really yours?" her friend Oluchi asked, running a hand over the car. "Yes, so Chief Emeka gifted it to me," she said as everyone opened their mouths in shock. For days, Onyi admired the car, feeling her life had taken a miraculous turn. She no longer had to struggle with public transport, and business would now be much easier. A week later, Onyi received an order for a large event in a neighboring town. Excited, she decided to take the car for its first catering delivery. As she drove through the quiet streets, something odd happened. The car's radio suddenly switched on by itself. At first, Onyi thought it was a glitch, but then she heard a strange whisper coming from the car radio, calling out a certain address repeatedly. Onyi thought that it was her mind messing with her, seeing that she didn't have enough rest at night because of the huge orders that she had to prepare. She continued driving, and then suddenly the car jerked violently, causing her heart to skip a beat. The steering wheel became stiff, and before she could react, the car came to a complete stop. "Not today," Onyi grumbled in frustration as her customer called her repeatedly to know where she was with the food. "The event is about to start. Where are you?" her customer asked as Onyi looked around for the address where the car had stopped her. The street sign at the corner caught her eye, and a chill ran down her spine. It was the exact address that she had heard repeatedly on the car radio. Her hands trembled as she checked the map on her phone. There was no mistake. She had never been here before, yet the car had brought her straight to this place. Onyi swallowed hard as she wondered what this could mean. She looked around, but nothing seemed suspicious. "Did the car bring me here?" she asked herself as she wondered what everything meant. Filled with so much curiosity, Oni decided to approach the address to see what she could find. She approached the house, which looked well taken care of. A car was parked outside, and Oni could hear voices in the house. She knocked on the door, and a young man answered. Oni, knowing how awkward it was to knock on a stranger's door without any reasonable explanation, quickly apologized for disturbing him. I'm so sorry to disturb, but my car stopped right in front of your house, and I wanted to see if maybe you knew a mechanic nearby. The young man's expression changed instantly. His friendly smile faded, and he took a step back, looking past Uni at the black SUV parked by the roadside. You came in that car? He asked Uni, who could sense a bit of fear in his voice. Uni stood there and watched as the young man warned her never to come close to him again. He banged the door to her face, leaving Oni in complete shock. Oni stood there frozen, staring at the closed door. Her heart pounded in her chest. What just happened? Why has this man reacted like this? She asked herself as she turned back to her car, feeling so uneasy. The road was quiet, the air thick with tension. Something was definitely wrong, and Oni could sense it. Taking a deep breath, she pulled out her phone, which was now ringing. Oni picked up the call and heard a strange voice, which commanded her to run. Filled with so much terror, Oni rushed to the car, and immediately the car came on. She drove quickly to the venue and met her angry customer, who glared at her angrily with her arms crossed. Oni, what kind of behavior is this? The customer said angrily as Oni stammered an apology to her and began to unload the food from her car. Oni could feel a cold sweat trickle down her back. Her entire body was filled with extreme fear as she pondered on what to do. The thought of driving the car back to her house terrified her greatly, but Oni was left with no choice. She could not abandon the car in her customer's home, but knew that she had to do something about it. She summoned all the courage that she could get and got into the car, deciding within herself to return it to Chief. As she drove the car along the road, Oni felt a strange movement in the car. She tried to figure out what was happening when hundreds of worms crawled from beneath the car and covered her entire body. Oni was so terrified. She screamed at the top of her voice as she swerved the car uncontrollably. Her vision blurred with fear, and her hands shook as she tried to maintain control of the steering wheel. The worms crawled over her arms, her face, her legs, everywhere. Their tiny cold bodies sent chills down her spine. She slammed her foot on the brakes, and the car screeched to a stop in the middle of the road. Panting heavily, she threw open the door and jumped out, brushing frantically at her body. But when she looked down, there was nothing. No worms, no movement. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she tried to catch her breath. Was she losing her mind? The car's headlights flickered, and then the voice returned. Get in, it said, as Oni gasped, stepping away from the car. She turned to run, but her legs refused to move. It felt as though something was holding her in place. Tears welled up in her eyes. She had to get away. She had to take the car back to Chief and demand answers. Summoning every ounce of courage, she forced herself back into the car. The moment she sat down, the doors locked automatically. She pounded on the window, screaming, but there was no one around to help her. Then, the car started moving on its own. Oni clutched the steering wheel, but it wouldn't turn. The pedals wouldn't respond too. She was trapped. The car picked up speed, heading straight for the outskirts of town. She had no idea where it was taking her until the car came to a complete stop. To her amazement, Oni found herself back at the strange house from earlier. The car was parked in front of the house. Oni could feel her hands tremble as she sat in the car staring at the house, whose doors seemed to be slightly open. Slowly, she stepped out of the car and walked towards the house. Oni could hear her heart beating through her chest. She arrived at the door and gently pushed it open for her to walk in. The house was completely silent as Oni made her way through the hall as she moved from one room to the other. Oni could not understand why the car had brought her to the house again. Was there something that it wanted her to see? Or was there some unfinished business tied to the house? She thought to herself. when suddenly she heard a car pull over in the driveway. Oni rushed to hide, as she couldn't let whoever it was find her wandering around the house. She hid in the wardrobe as the door of the house shut closed from the distance. Oni could not risk being caught. She held her breath as she peeped through the wardrobe door, hoping to see or hear something, when suddenly the bedroom door swung open and the young man from earlier walked in. He looked so terrified as he dialed a number on his phone. The phone rang repeatedly, and after several trials, the person on the other end picked the call. Oni could feel the tension in the room. She wished she could hear what they were saying, but they spoke in a different language that made it impossible for her to understand. The man's hands trembled as he spoke. His voice was filled with fear as he kept glancing towards the window, terrified. Oni remained completely still, her heart pounding in her chest. She dared not to move, as she could not risk being caught. Then the conversation stopped, and the man immediately grabbed his keys and left the house. Oni could not beat the feeling that something was up. She jumped out of the wardrobe and peeked through the window, where she saw the man staring at the car in terror. Oni's breath hitched. She ducked behind the curtains, watching as the man cautiously circled the black SUV, his expression filled with fear and uncertainty. His fingers grazed the hood as he stepped back as though the car might come alive at any moment. After a few tense seconds, he glanced over his shoulder as if checking if anyone was watching, then hurriedly got into his car and drove off in panic. Oni let out a shaky breath. She had to know what was going on. Summoning every ounce of courage, she tiptoed out of the house and approached the SUV. Oni hesitated as her hand hovered over the door handle. She thought of if it was a good idea to get back into the car. Would the car trap her again? She thought to herself, when suddenly the car trunk popped open on its own. Oni was so petrified. Her entire body shook as she approached the trunk. Compelled by a mix of dread and curiosity, she stepped forward and peered inside the trunk. A chill ran down her spine as she caught sight of a blood-stained scarf inside the trunk. Oni could feel a cold shiver run down her spine. She stared at the scarf and wondered if the scarf had anything to do with the strange things that had been happening. Oni, at this point, could not take it any longer. She got into the car, determined to return the car back to Chief. She drove for hours, terrified that something strange would happen, but nothing did. Just as she was about turning into Chief's close, Oni caught sight of the strange man again, driving out of Chief's house. Her entire body froze as so many thoughts ran through her mind. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel as she wondered what the strange man was doing in Chief's house. Did Chief know? What connection did they have? These were the questions that lingered in Oni's mind as she decided to return home to think things through. She needed to gather more information before confronting Chief. That night, sleep eluded Oni. She tossed and turned in bed as the events of the past few days replayed in her mind. The car, the strange man, the address, it was all connected, but Oni could not figure out how. By morning, she decided to visit the one person who she believed would have answers. Oni drove the car hesitantly to an old mechanic whose name was Babajide, a well-respected man in the city who had great connections and access to information. Oni remembered how Babajide helped her friend Oluchi to find the man who stole her car at gunpoint. Even the police, after days of investigation, could not fish him out, but Babajide, using his connections, found the culprit after a few phone calls. Oni knew that if anyone could decipher what had happened, it would be him. She drove into his mechanic workshop, and Babajide was so shocked to see her. He wiped his greasy hands on his overall and approached her, asking where she got the car, and Oni narrated the whole story to him. How Chief had gifted her a car that had now turned to her worst nightmare. Babajide listened as his face darkened. "My daughter," he began in a low voice. This car has a very dark story, a story I believe that you haven't been told. Oni could feel her heart pound through her chest. What do you mean? She asked, gripping her hands tightly. Babajide sighed heavily and told her to follow him into his workshop. He searched through a pile of old newspapers and pulled out one from the stack. He spread it out for Oni, tapping his finger on a particular headline. Oni's eyes widened as she scanned the article. A young woman, identified as Chinelo Okafor, the only daughter of Chief Emeka Okafor, had vanished without a trace 5 years ago. The report revealed that Chinelo was last seen driving the black SUV. Oni's breath caught in her throat as she remembered the blood-stained scarf she found at the trunk of the car. Babajide narrated the story to her. It was believed that Chief Emeka had a hand in the disappearance of his daughter. Many believed that he used his daughter for rituals because of the amount of wealth he amassed shortly after her disappearance. Others believed that the car was a part of the sacrifice because his daughter disappeared on the same day that he got her the car. Oni's entire body turned cold. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, and the truth was far more terrifying than she had imagined. She returned home and met her friend Oluchi, who could not help but notice the terror in her eyes. Oluchi frowned, placing a hand on Oni's shoulder as she asked what the problem was. Oni swallowed hard, her voice shaking as she spoke. Oluchi, Chief Emeka, he sacrificed his own daughter. Oluchi's eyes widened in horror. What? Are you sure? Oni nodded. Babajide showed me an old newspaper. Chinelo Okafor was her name, and she was Chief's only daughter, who vanished 5 years ago. The last time she was seen, she was driving this same car. People believe Chief used her for rituals and that this car was part of the sacrifice. Oni, you need to get rid of this car, she said to Oni, whose face twisted in frustration. That's the problem, Oluchi. I can't just get rid of it. Chief will come after me, and I'm so terrified. I don't know what to do, she said to Oluchi, who told her that she had a plan. Oluchi worked at a spa where Chief's wife frequented. She had overheard Chief's wife, Lady Ifoma, speaking with her friend about how she was planning to file for a divorce. According to what Oluchi had heard, Lady Ifoma suspected her husband of being involved in dark dealings. However, she never had any proof of this. Something had changed recently, and she was now determined to leave him for good. Oluchi turned to Oni, her eyes gleaming with hope. If Chief's wife is already planning to divorce him, she might be willing to help you. This could be our chance to expose him. Oni hesitated. You think she will believe me? Oluchi nodded firmly. She already suspects something. If we give her real evidence, she might finally have the courage to bring him down. Oni took a deep breath. She had nothing to lose and decided to give it a shot. The next day, Oni devised a means to meet with Lady Ifoma. She paid for a spa session and purposely placed herself next to Lady Ifoma to enable her have a conversation with her. Lady Ifoma was seated comfortably in the spa, her eyes closed as the masseuse walked on her shoulders. Oni sat comfortably next to her as Oluchi began to massage her own shoulders. Then they began to have a conversation about Chief, pretending not to know who Lady Ifoma was. Men like Chief Emeka think they can do anything and get away with it, she said casually as Lady Ifoma's eyes snapped open. She turned slightly, glancing at Oni. What do you mean? She asked, her voice calm but laced with curiosity. Oluchi continued her massage as if she hadn't noticed the tension in the air. Oni hesitated for a moment before responding to Lady Ifoma. I've heard stories about him, dark stories, but you know how people gossip in this city. Lady Ifoma scoffed. People have always been talking about my husband for years. They say he's involved in all sorts of things, but no one ever has proof. Oni swallowed hard. This was her chance. She lowered her voice and said to Lady Ifoma that she had proof. Lady Ifoma froze and slowly turned to look at Oni, her expression unreadable. What proof? Oni's hands trembled slightly. She leaned closer. His daughter Chinelo, the car she disappeared in, is in my possession. and I found something in the car that would prove that Chief was the one responsible for his daughter's death. Lady Former at this point sat up, looking so interested in her revelation. She asked for full details, assuring Onyi that she would be willing to help in bringing Chief down if what she was saying was true. Onyi could not believe how easy it was to get Lady Former on board. Lady Former's expression darkened as Onyi revealed everything to her: the car's strange behavior, the bloodstained scarf, the article about Chinelo's disappearance, and even the terrified reaction of the man who had seen the car parked in front of his house. Lady Former clenched her fist, her breath coming out in short, furious bursts. "I always knew something was off," she said. "I knew my husband was hiding something." She turned to Onyi, her voice firm. "We need to take action immediately. First, the evidence has to be secured because I know how ruthless my husband would be when he realizes that something like this exists." Onyi could not help but agree. She stared at Oluchi, who asked her where the scarf was, and Onyi revealed that she left the scarf in the trunk of the car. "I was too scared to touch it," she said to them, as they advised her to retrieve it immediately and store it in a safe place. Onyi heeded to their advice and rushed off to her house. To her greatest surprise, the car was no longer parked in her driveway. Onyi's heart dropped. She spun around frantically, searching the compound. The black SUV was gone. Panic surged through her veins. Had she found out? Had someone stolen the car? Or worse, had the car moved on its own? She rushed back inside and grabbed her phone, dialing Oluchi's number with trembling fingers. "Oluchi, the car is gone, oh," she whispered in horror. "What?" Oluchi asked shockingly, as she asked if she left her gate open. "No, I locked everything, but it's not here." "Oluchi, the car is gone." Oluchi was silent for a moment. "Onyi, listen. Get out of that house now. Come to my place immediately." Onyi did not hesitate. She grabbed her purse and bolted out of the house. Fear gripped her like a vice as she hailed a passing tricycle and instructed the driver to take her straight to Oluchi's house. By the time she arrived, her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Oluchi pulled her inside and locked the door. "Did anyone see you?" Oluchi asked, as Onyi shook her head, her breath ragged. "I don't think so. But Oluchi, what if Chief knows? What if he took the car? Or maybe the car moved on its own." Onyi could not help but shake in fear. That car wasn't normal. It had led her to that strange house. It had locked her inside. It had whispered to her. Now it was gone without a trace. "We need to tell Lady Former," Oluchi said firmly, without wasting time. They dialed Lady Former's number and she picked up almost immediately. "Have you secured the evidence?" she asked urgently, as Onyi swallowed hard and revealed to her that the car was missing. A sharp intake of breath came from the other end. "What do you mean missing? I parked it at my house. It was there, but now it's gone." Lady Former's voice dropped to a whisper. She urged Onyi to hide, revealing that her husband had been acting strangely since morning. "He left the house in a rush this morning after receiving a phone call," Lady Former said to Onyi, who felt a lump form in her throat. She was so terrified of what Chief would do to her and began to think of what to do next. Just as they sat there confused, Lady Former called up her phone again to reveal that Chief had sent some men after them. "Onyi, listen to me. I think my husband sent his men after you. You need to disappear," she said as she hung up the phone. Onyi and her friend Oluchi began to tremble. They could not let Chief's men meet them in the house, so they picked up a few items and scampered for safety. Just as they were about running out of the house, a group of armed men stormed into the house and caught them. Onyi and Oluchi froze as the armed men stormed in. Their hearts pounded wildly. There was nowhere else to run. "Don't move," one of the men barked, his gun aimed directly at them. He walked towards them, lowering his gaze, when he suddenly saw Onyi and froze in shock. "Madam," he said excitedly, as Onyi looked at him confused. "Do I know you?" she asked the man, who pulled down his mask to reveal his face. Onyi could not believe her eyes. Before her was a man who she had once helped. Years ago, when she catered for a huge event, A hungry-looking man approached her to beg for food. His clothes were tattered, and his face was sunken with hunger. Onyi gave him a large portion of food and even packed some extra for him to take home. Now, the same man was standing before her with a gun in his hand. "You helped me once," he said, lowering his weapon completely. "You gave me food when I had nothing." He continued as Onyi swallowed hard, wondering what her fate would be now that she had seen his face. The other armed men looked at their boss in confusion. They asked what they should do with them, and their boss ordered that they be released. Onyi, still trembling in fear, asked the man why Chief wanted them dead, and the man revealed to her that he didn't work for Chief. Onyi and her friend Oluchi looked at each other stunned as Onyi asked him who he worked for. The man shook his head as he stared right at her. "I work for someone else, someone who is even more dangerous." A chill ran down Onyi's spine as she asked who it was. The man hesitated, glancing at his men. Then he lowered his voice and revealed that he worked for Lady Former. Onyi's heart stopped. "What?" she asked, shocked to her marrow. Onyi could not believe what she was hearing. All the while, she believed Chief was behind the disappearance of his daughter, not knowing that the woman that she so trusted was the devil in disguise. Onyi could not help but wonder why. Chief Emeka is the one everyone believes is responsible for Chinelo's disappearance. The man shook his head as he looked her right in the eyes. That's what she wanted everyone to believe. "You mean Lady Former was behind it all?" The man nodded in agreement. Lady Former planned everything. Chinelo was never really her daughter. Onyi felt the air leave her lungs. "What do you mean?" The man's face was grim. "The day Lady Former gave birth, she lost her child. The baby didn't survive, but no one knew, not even Chief. She paid off a nurse at the hospital to switch her dead child with another newborn baby." Onyi's knees felt weak. She stumbled, gripping Oluchi's arm for support. The man continued. "That newborn was Chinelo. She was never really Chief's daughter, but Chief loved her like she was. He adored her. He raised her with so much love and affection, whilst Lady Former was filled with jealousy." Onyi felt sick. She was jealous of her own daughter? Onyi asked shockingly, as the man corrected her, saying that Lady Former was jealous because Chinelo wasn't her daughter. Chief favored Chinelo over everyone, including his own wife. He wrote his will and left everything to Chinelo, and Lady Former could not stand the thought of a complete stranger inheriting all that her husband had worked for. Oluchi gasped. "That's why she killed her?" The man nodded. Lady Former could not stand it. She had lived in Chief's shadows for years, and now everything was about to go to a girl who wasn't even her real daughter. She knew she had to eliminate Chinelo before the truth came out. Onyi clutched her chest as she asked about the haunted car, and the man revealed to her that Chinelo was killed inside that car. "I was there when it happened, and it was so painful to watch." Tears welled up in Onyi's eyes as she wondered how wicked a woman would be to kill a child that she raised as her own. She had to make Lady Former pay for her wrong and pleaded with the man to help. "Help me bring her down, or else she will come after us all," she said to the man, who handed her an envelope with some pictures and an address showing where Chinelo was buried. When Onyi looked at the address, she realized that it was the same address where the strange car had taken her to. It all began to make more sense to Onyi, who took the photos to the police. The moment Onyi handed the envelope to the police, everything changed. The officer in charge carefully examined the photographs. His expression darkened as he asked where she got the photos. Onyi swallowed hard, revealing that she got it from someone who used to work for Lady Former. The officer exchanged glances with his colleague. If this is true, Lady Former has more blood on her hands than we ever imagined. Immediately, he picked up his radio and called for backup. That night, a team of officers surrounded the house where Chinelo was buried. They moved in silently, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The eerie quiet of the backyard sent chills down Onyi's spine as she stood with Oluchi watching from a distance. Then they started digging. The first thing they uncovered was a piece of fabric, which was badly stained with blood. Moments later, the officers uncovered a body in a shallow grave. The discovery sent shockwaves through the city. The story broke on the news, and Chief Emeka was invited for questioning. But when he was confronted with the truth, he was as shocked as everyone else in the room. "I didn't kill my daughter," he insisted, revealing to them that all these years he believed that his daughter had run away. What he did not know was that his wife killed their daughter because of her selfish interest. The revelation spread like wildfire, and within hours, a nationwide manhunt was launched for Lady Former. However, she had already gone into hiding. The police raided her mansion, her private office, and even the luxury spa where she often visited, yet there was no trace of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Days passed, and the investigation deepened. The police uncovered shocking details that Lady Former had not acted alone. There was a man, a mysterious figure, who had been seen with her in recent meetings. A man who had been withdrawing large sums of money from her account, and most importantly, the man who had fled the strange house when Uni first arrived there. The police realized that this man wasn't just an accomplice, he was her lover. For years, while Chief Emeka believed he was in control of his household, Lady Former had been running a secret affair with this man, a man whose name was Maxwell Obina. Maxwell was no ordinary lover. He was a cunning and dangerous man who had been helping Lady Former cover up her crimes for years. Together, they had planned Chinelo's murder. Together, they had buried her. And together, they had disappeared. But Oni was hell-bent on finding them. She approached Babajide, who promised to find them for her. With his network of informants, it didn't take long before Lady Former and her lover were tracked down. They were hiding in a secluded villa on the outskirts of town, under false identities, believing that they were untouchable, but Oni was determined to bring them to justice. She passed the information to the police, who initiated a covert operation to apprehend them. In the dead of the night, the police stormed the villa and surrounded the property. Inside, Lady Former and Maxwell were enjoying a quiet evening, completely unaware of the doom that loomed over them. The moment they heard the police break through the front door, they jumped up in panic. Lady Former bolted for the back door, but she was met with a row of armed officers whose guns were now drawn towards her. There was nowhere to run, the lead officer said, as her lover grabbed a gun from the table, ready to fight his way out. But before he could fire, an officer tackled him to the ground, disarming him in an instant. As Lady Former was being handcuffed, she turned to her lover, who blamed her for all that happened. Lady Former could not believe that he was heaping the blame on her after everything that happened between them. She opened up to the police about other crimes that he committed in a bid to save herself, but the police were not ready to set her free. They were hell-bent on making them pay for their crimes. The officers dragged them apart, their shouts fading into the night as they were thrown into separate police vehicles. Oni watched from a distance, standing beside Oluchi, as her hands trembled. However, her heart was at peace, knowing that justice had finally been served. As the police convoy disappeared into the night, a cold gust of wind blew past Oni, making her shiver. She turned her gaze to the black SUV, which was parked in front of the house. For the first time since the nightmare began, the car was silent. No whispers, no strange voices, and most importantly, no worms crawling from the shadows. Oni exhaled shakily, knowing one thing for sure, that Chinelo's spirit had finally found peace. That was how a crime of over 5 years was solved by a woman who only wanted a car to make her work easier. The lesson to be learned from this story is that nothing remains hidden forever. Truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply buried it is. Lady Former believed she could erase her crime, but fate had other plans for her. Justice may take time, but it always arrives, often through the most unexpected means. Another lesson is that acts of kindness can come back in ways we never expect. Onyi's selfless act of feeding a hungry man years ago ultimately saved her life. It's a reminder that even the smallest good can have a lasting impact. Lastly, Greed and jealousy only lead to destruction. Lady Informer's envy and desire for wealth led her to commit an unforgivable crime. But in the end, she lost everything. No matter how much we desire power or riches, when we obtain them through evil means, they will eventually become our downfall. I hope you enjoyed the story.